Okay, so week 2 in this Engaging Emotions series. Pastor Brianne did a fantastic job last week kicking this off for us. I'm not going to try to summarize everything she said, but if you were here, obviously you heard it. If you weren't, just give you a couple main points. We talked about how emotions, the human emotions, are something that actually help us to reveal the image of God in our world. Because God has emotions, we are made in His image, we too have emotions. Emotions also help us to discern what it is that we really love, or how we can reorder the things that we love. And we talked about why turning off emotions, stoicism we could say, is really unwise, because it both blinds the world to the image of God that is in us, but also because it then makes us unable to discern what it is that maybe we love that we shouldn't, or what we should love more, etc., etc., etc. But we also talked about why turning our emotions way up on high isn't the answer either, because if everything is just so deeply emotional, then nothing is emotional, and everything is just lost in the sea. And so we talked about this third way, which is actually to take those emotions and engage them in such a way that we are pouring out our hearts before God and doing our best then to reorder our feelings. So today we're going to begin an exploration of 3 large emotions that we will look at today, next week, and the following. And these are emotions that we would probably consider negative, emotions that I think we would all agree have had a lot of influence on our lives, both through our lives and from others upon our lives. And those emotions are anger, fear, and then sorrow or grief. So today we get to begin with anger. So I recently watched a movie called Southpaw. Came out, 2015 or so, just about 10 years ago. And it's about a boxer who loses everything. And then he must literally fight to put his world back together. And I won't say too much about the plot line other than to say it's really a story about anger against anger. And if you think about that theme isn't so unique. Most of our great movies or our epics have the same general story. Gladiator, Braveheart, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Revenant, Unforgiven, The Road to Perdition. It's righteous anger against unrighteous anger. And it seems that our Western culture loathes the villain who destroys out of anger, but we also love the hero motivated by righteous indignation. We don't even call it anger, we call it indignation. And who goes and takes on that evil villain. And it's sort of odd to admit, but it seems that we are ceaselessly entertained by the tension and the battle between anger for good and anger for evil. And so maybe it's because we're all so familiar with both sides of that coin. We've been angry, if we're honest, more times than we can remember. Sometimes justifiably so, but many other times without any good justification. The Bible teaches that God gets angry. In fact, His name given to Moses is slow to anger, so He's patient, but He does get angry. God is a God who has wrath, as much as our postmodern minds don't like to hear that. The Bible teaches that humans can be angry and not sin. Paul says that in Ephesians 4:26. When angry, do not sin. And the Bible then also teaches that anger can be a tool or an avenue, a vehicle to sin. And so anger is this sort of complex thing, yet it's very familiar. And so learning how to engage anger as a Christian, I think, remains really quite a complex puzzle for us, for most students of Jesus. And so anger then is often ignored, or it's excused, or it's laughed off after the fact, like, oh man, I was really mad. And we giggle about it. Anger is believed, it seems, to be no big deal if we acknowledge and laugh enough about when anger now has finally turned to calm. As long as I think it's funny after the fact, then it's okay. And these are these often employed strategies, we could say, for anger management. What is done less, it seems, amongst Christians, but also amongst people in general, is that anger is treated as management rather than engagement, where we seek to engage it for the sake of transformation. And so my hope then today is to talk about anger, talk about unrighteous anger, but how to engage unrighteous anger in such a way not just that it's managed, but that it actually becomes transformed into righteous anger, actually into an anger that resembles God. So what we're going to do, and I warn you, I have content today, is we are going to give some expressions of unrighteous anger, what that looks like, common to all of us. And then we're going to define that as well. And then we're going to define righteous anger, and then how we can practice certain behaviors that help us to engage unrighteous anger for the sake of transformation. Okay, so what's anger? I mean, I don't know, 1 million plus definitions of this, so this is like literally just pulling one down. But here's a short definition out of a book called The Cry of the Soul, How Emotions Reveal Our Deepest Questions About God. Anger is our response to an assault. Really simply, anger is a response to an assault. So obviously that can be anything, assault against our emotions, a physical assault, anything we deem to be assaulting. Now here's a bit more descriptive definition out of a book called Untangling Emotions. It says, when you're angry, what is happening inside is this: your heart is observing the scene before you and crying out that something you love is being treated unjustly. Finally, I think it's worth mentioning, and maybe this is common knowledge to some of you, maybe this will be the first time you've ever thought about this, but anger is always a secondary emotion. Anger is always the result of something else. So you feel jealous, you feel slighted, you feel taken advantage of. Therefore, you're angry. Now, before we move any further, and someone tries at this point to dismiss this message as not applicable to them, I am going to say this with all love and respect. No one ever believes they are angry. No one ever believes they're the angry person. We can all accept that we get angry, but most people, especially good church-going folk, have a really hard time believing that they might be an angry person. And so therefore, it is quite possible for any of us gathered here today to just dismiss this sermon as something that really isn't for me, but I can think very quickly of someone it is for. This is the great human tendency. Well, I know an angry person that needs to hear this. Anger is common to all of us, yes. And it is especially common to some of us. But in one way or another, all of us are in this together, okay? And so it's an important topic to consider and think about and explore. Now, sticking with this, are we angry? Am I an angry person question? It's possible most of us don't even know how to assess if we are an angry person versus a person that sometimes gets angry. How do we distinguish between anger that is common to all people and anger is something that is more of a habit or a consistent force in one's life? So I thought it might be helpful to give a little bit of a way that you can discern this in your own life. So here's some more definition from this Untangling Emotions. These are great books, by the way, if you're looking for resources. Angry people tend to be highly tuned to the failings of others and are quick to offer and enact correction. Angry people are highly tuned to the failings of others and are quick to offer or enact correction. Go on. Whether through a timid anger, offering subtle criticisms, commonly called passive-aggressive, or a more brazen approach that raises its voice and bangs on the table, angry people constantly send an implicit, sometimes even explicit message to those around them: don't cross me or you will face the consequences. Anger's instinct is to punish and attack whatever or whomever it perceives is wrong. It's what makes angry people unpleasant to be around. Highly tuned to the failings of others. So we've all acted like this, all of us guilty as charged, but some of us maybe sense that's more habitually my pattern. But either way, we're in this, as I've said, struggle together, and there is a way forward, a way in which we engage this emotion rather than letting it be Lord of our life or dismissing it, as it's not really much of a big deal. I just laugh about it. So we're going to talk about that engagement in just a moment, but first we're going to talk about why we need to engage it by looking at 3 expressions of unrighteous anger, all right? You can turn to Psalm 109. Verses 1 through 15. I'm going to just warn you now that if you think that the Bible is only full of pleasant anecdotes, this is going to rock your world. All right, let's go. This is a psalm of King David. My God, whom I praise. Do not remain silent, for people who are wicked and deceitful have opened their mouths against me. They have spoken against me with lying tongues. With words of hatred they surround me. They attack me without cause. In return for my friendship they accuse me, but I am a man of prayer. They repay me evil for good and hatred for my friendship. Stop. There's the injustice. There's the assault. So this is what's happened to King David. So now's the response to the assault. And this is where we really dig in. Appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. May his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May a creditor seize all he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. May no one extend kindness to him or take pity on his fatherless children. May his descendants be cut off, their names blotted out from the next generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord. May the sin of his mother never be blotted out. May their sins always remain before the Lord, that he may blot out their names from the earth. Do you remember that when Mike Tyson would go on rants? This is like honestly what I think about every time I read this. Like Mike Tyson talking about Evander Holyfield. Like this is heavy-duty intensity. And the more I considered this passage this week, every time I read it, I was startled but also sort of amused by the intensity. They are so harsh, these words. And I hope it goes without saying, but a theologian named Derek Kidner says about this psalm, these words are for our learning, not for our imitation. They're helpful for us to learn because we may want to discount their pertinence based on the harshness. Yet we are not so different. If you've had a really bad day at work, anybody ever had one of those? You know that it is easy to make everything the target of your anger. The colleague or employee, the system, the computer, the month, the day of the week, what you did or didn't have for lunch. Then you come home and you're angry at the food options for dinner. Maybe you're mad at your spouse just because they're your spouse. Your kids, you're mad at the weather. You're angry with the lawn. Maybe the neighbor catches a touch of your wrath. The pet is punished. When we are angry, there are not enough targets. And that's a similar experience to what we see going on in Psalm 109. King David is really angry. He's been hurt, he's been lied about, he's been falsely accused. Even when he tried to extend friendship, we'd say he's been betrayed. And if there was a target to be made, David found it, and he cried out to God to bring severe punishment upon his adversary. And so while our anger is often, like a shotgun blast and it just hits a number of targets. David is focused on his adversary, but he spreads that anger very liberally all over the adversary's world, we could say. David includes his enemy's children, his spouse, his parents, his credit rating, his position, his job, his health. Nothing is spared. David wants justice, and he wants it to be thorough. And David does look to God with his anger, which is it's the best part of sort of like our habits and patterns. But I'm a man of prayer. And he's praying. This is a prayer. Oh God, who am I praise? And yet there is so much impatience in these words. And we actually don't know the context. We don't know the story behind the psalm specifically. We don't know what it was. We know David had different struggles. Saul, Absalom, his son. There's different moments in his life where he felt this. We don't know specifically what he's talking about. But I think we should assume that this is pretty early on in his engagement with God about his anger. And even if, as you move through the psalm, it does actually start to turn. But at this point, this does not resemble righteous anger, the anger of God, very well. David's prayerful, but he's not waiting for God's direction. He's just telling God what to do. David wants help, he wants justice now, and he wants it, though, his way. And that is often how unrighteous anger looks. We want justice, which is okay, but we want it our way. We want it our time. So rather than waiting for God, we make our plans. So in these plans, David does three things. Expressions of anger. He seeks to consume, he seeks to control, and he seeks to condemn. Consume, control, condemn. So that's what we're going to look at. Unrighteous anger produces a hunger that consumes other people. Verse 6, appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy, and then at the end, second half of verse 15, blot out their name from the earth. So the word for enemy or adversary that's used here is actually the word where Satan's name is derived from. Same word. And it makes sense because Satan is obviously the ultimate accuser. He's the condemner of God's people, and David is feeling wrongly accused here. Now, it's easy to see in this psalm that David doesn't see his experience as an unfortunate disagreement between two gentlemen. You know, it's too bad that happened between us. He's a good guy, you know. David sees his experience as severe and a false accusation against him. He sees severe injustice, and so he prays for this intervention. But his prayer isn't just for his deliverance, is it? Oh, God, help me. David is praying ultimately a curse. It is the complete opposite of a blessing. He's cursing his enemy to be opposed and annihilated. His entire legacy, his family line annihilated. David doesn't want to just be free from his struggle. He wants the person who was cruel towards him to be consumed by evil opposition and severe consequence. Now, when I talk about consumed, what I'm meaning is this desire to have our emptiness, which comes from a perceived injustice, filled back up by taking from someone else. Likely the offender, but often anybody who's, in earshot. You see, when something bad happens to us, something that is cause for anger, it always feels like a deficit or a withdrawal, like something has been taken. So it's debited from our peace or our joy or whatever. And then the anger is the attempt to find justice by consuming something until that hunger for justice feels satisfied. I read one description of anger this week that likened it to a desire to taste heaven now. I will not wait. I want it now. I want perfection in my world now. And the emptiness from injustice then leaves this desperate hole, and so we seek to consume to fill ourselves up. Now, that might be accomplished through other means, other bad habits. We might drink too much. We might watch things we shouldn't be watching. We might seek out other expressions. But often we just consume others. Like Pac-Man biting everything in his path, Nothing remains. We devour others until we take enough from them that now we feel better or we feel full. And so if you're not convinced yet, just imagine the last time you were angry in a way that was not like God. And for the angry period, it is likely that others were not made better and filled up by your anger. They were not filled up by your wrath. They were not helped or taught a good, important lesson that would last. Instead, it's probable that person after person ended up losing something while your anger drove you to consume. And so while the anger consumes, others lose their joy, they lose their peace, they lose their plans for later that day. They lose their backbone, they lose their identity, they lose their self-worth. Their otherwise good day is ruined. It could be anything, but people lose when anger consumes. And so even Paul warns the Galatians of such tendencies. Galatians 5:15, he says, if you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. In other words, what Paul's talking about is you're going to make this grace and law argument so severe with such deep anger towards each other that you will actually just consume each other till there's nothing left. And that's ultimately David's wish, that his enemy would be consumed to the point of being forgotten. Anger seeks to consume. Next, unrighteous anger condemns. Psalm 109:7. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. The day the evacuation happened, Chantel left work, as many of you did, and she walked to her vehicle. And when she got to her car, she found a man writing a note of apology. In the mood of panic and haste, this gentleman reversed quickly and slammed into Chantel's parked car. What made matters worse was he had no insurance. We were angry. We had no choice but to put it on pause and evacuate, which we did. When we had time, we, of course, dealt with our own insurance, finding out he wasn't able to pay for the repairs himself as he wanted to. So we phoned insurance, and we filed a police report. Our insurance covers it. It was no expense to us. The deductible, that's about the worst it gets. But the thing is, we didn't just want our vehicle repaired. We wanted to know what became of him. Like, honestly. Like, what will be his punishment? 5 to 7 years in prison? Would that be fair? Yeah, right, exactly. But the point is, that's what anger does. It condemns, and it blames, and it finds guilty. You see, David doesn't just want God, again, to take care of his needs. He wants the enemy condemned, that he would be found guilty, even by his own prayers. When we are angry, it is almost a guarantee that at some point we consider, imagine, or even investigate how our adversary will be held accountable. We are never greater experts in the laws of our country than when we are mad. And we express proud blame, and we hope for punishment. That is, of course, if we can't just handle it ourselves, then we hope for punishment. We want a good chastisement doled out on the adversary. And the result of this expression of anger is then, if it becomes habitual, is it eventually causes other people to avoid and distrust you. Because who wants to constantly be blamed and punished? With lectures and lessons, little criticisms, and worse. When a person lives with an angry person, the conversations are always guarded. There's no vulnerability. Information is always withheld. Actions are always pre-calculated as to not get in trouble should we make the wrong move. And often the angry person doesn't even realize that those people are doing that around them. Anger is often so condemning in its nature that if you know somebody who is habitually mistrusting, like in their demeanor, they struggle with trust, or they seem nervous, or they kind of walk on eggshells, and they calculate every conversation and every move at work, and they're always wondering if this is the right thing, it is probable that that person has an angry person lurking in the bushes of their life. Because that they are always afraid they will be held accountable by that judge. Finally, unrighteous anger controls. Verses 8 through 11, may his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless. His wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May a creditor seize all he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. These are specific, very specific prayers, even cruel experiences that he is wishing that his adversary would experience. Ultimately, David is desiring disgrace to the enemy and his memory to be lost. And though it may not be obvious at first, anger is seeking to control in this psalm. It's seeking to control all the outcomes, seeking to control the other person. David wants very specific things to happen to his accuser. I want your wife to experience this. I want your children to experience that. Because you did this to me, then your career is going to be that. That's the punishment. And your memory is going to be this. This is how I want it to go for you. I want you to have no control and no choice, just consequence. You crossed me. And this is what anger does. It says, you can or cannot do this because I'm now making the decisions because I'm mad. The Cry of the Soul, Dan Allender and Tremper Longman say that selfish anger is focused on wrong done to oneself, often prompted by inconvenience or insult. That's such a great thing, such an important thing to underline. Inconvenience. Even when we feel inconvenienced, we get like this. And this type of anger can be used to control or manipulate others. Someone yells at members of their family to interrupt them and to shut down dissenting views. Don't argue with me. You don't get to say anything. I'm just going to yell at you so I can't hear you. Or to retaliate against someone who's insulted them. Control is this expression of anger because anger seeks to limit others' choice when we're mad. Give us all the authority. No, you don't get any say in this. And so as they point out in this quote, we'll yell or we'll intimidate in an argument, in a discussion. We'll give the silent treatment to suppress a person's ability to say anything else to us, to call us on our crap. Because if we go silent, then the only way forward is for them to apologize. Otherwise, we're not going to talk to them. We say we're not talking about it anymore after we just said everything we wanted to say. We gaslight, to use a popular term. You know, gaslighting. I've always wondered, why do we call it that? That's a terrible, terrible, terrible term for what it is. Gaslighting is to cause another to doubt their perceptions about a situation or their feelings about an event. So we'll gaslight when we do things like, in our anger, no, you didn't understand what I meant by that. No, I think you're just being overly sensitive. And immediately the person goes, oh, okay, well, maybe I am. Controlled the situation. It's to offer that fast criticism about the other person's behavior so they can't say anything about us. You know, I feel hurt by the way you acted like this. Yeah, well, do you remember when you acted like that? Well, yes, but we're talking about what you just did. It's a control of the situation. Untangling Emotions offers this sobering thought about anger expressed in control. Anger offers the intoxicating experience of playing God. I've been lawgiver, judge, and jury in ordering the world according to what I like. Ugly anger is utterly arrogant. Anger that limits choice is so supremely arrogant because it's to behave like God. It's to do what only God ultimately can do. So this is a really, really tip of the iceberg look at anger. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm having to learn all this stuff as I get ready to teach it to you. I'm not an expert on this. I am a beginner on this stuff. But anger does consume, condemn, and control. And I've been angry enough in my own life that I know this is true. And if you're feeling challenged or you're feeling convicted, there is good news. Anger is actually not always bad. There is redemption in anger. There is a way forward. And anger can be controlled. And anger actually, amazingly, can even be used for good. In fact, much of the redemption in the world, at the greatest injustices, have come when somebody finally got angry enough about the right thing. But we have to engage God with our anger, rather than playing God through our anger. So how do we engage anger in a way that it'll turn to righteousness? We're going to answer that in a second. But here's a definition of righteous anger. So if unrighteous anger is kind of this response to an assault and us trying to control and condemn, etc., then righteous anger does this. It still warns, and it invites, and it will even wound. But it's for the greater work of redemption. It is full of a strength that is neither defensive nor vindictive, and it is permeated by a sadness that is rich in desire and hope. Most importantly, righteous anger allows the offense to be seen as an issue between the offender and God. It might go without saying, but our usual anger is far more often absent of any redemptive purpose. It's not permeated by sadness for what happened. It's just raging and wrathful, inconvenienced. So this is how we then go from that moment of, that's all about us, into a moment where there might actually be redemption possible. And that is ultimately, and you've been doing this with your children if you've raised them for a very long time, so this shouldn't be that surprising to us, but it still is. We need to take a sanctified time out. When you're angry, be still and wait. Psalm 37, 7 and 8. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Don't fret. Instead, refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, because it only leads to evil. Be still and wait before the Lord and wait patiently for him. That's the instruction. And then it gives some do nots. Do this instead, but be still and wait patiently. You know, if there is anything that makes engaging our anger for the sake of transformation into the image of God more difficult than hurry and impatience, I'm not sure what that would be or what those things are. You see, in our culture, waiting is often equated with doing nothing. And for some people, having time to wait means, I've got time to sort out the problem. If I've got time to wait, then I've got time to do something about it. And so then we come up with the control, condemn, consume type problem solving rather than waiting. Waiting, unfortunately, for our hurried lives means no instant solution, no timeline. No quick satisfaction, no instant gratification for blame and vindictiveness directed to someone who made us mad or inconvenienced us, or just so happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Waiting is also equated too often in our culture to being not that upset. Well, if I wait, that means that I don't really care, or I'm not that bothered, because if I cared, I would do something about it. I would get to the bottom of it. If I wait, if I just go pray about it, the person who's made me so mad is going to think that I'm not that upset. I can't wait around. They have to know that I'm violated. But Psalm 37 reminds us so well that waiting is neither inaction or denial. Being still before the Lord and waiting patiently for him is to take the offense before God, pour out our hearts, seek his discernment for what is really bothering us. Remember, anger is a secondary emotion. Sometimes we don't know what caused it exactly. And we need to sit in God's presence and ask his discernment to reveal in us what is ultimately offended. Because it could be jealousy, it could be loneliness, it could be feelings of abandonment that we've never dealt with. It could be feelings of being underappreciated because we've been so driven by performance. Those are all the things that could be behind anger. And we need God to sometimes help us see that, all the time to help us see that. And through that slower process of prayerful waiting, we invite God to lead us then in His way forward, which is not to say I do nothing. It's to say if I have been violated and hurt, God, how should I handle this? It's not letting it go necessarily. It could be that. But it may be, how do I go forward in a way that is both merciful, gracious, but also redemptive? We invite God to show us that the anger doesn't need to be dismissed. That it's okay that we feel this way, but it does need to be transformed into something that seeks, yes, justice, but also to heal. It's something far closer to God's salvation than it is a toddler's fit. So waiting, in addition to waiting, we transform anger when we cultivate humility. And I could have added to this, when we cultivate humility by good thinking. Psalm 4:4, in your anger do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. When you, in your anger, do not sin, and when you're on your bed, search your hearts and be silent. So taking our anger to God in prayerful stillness and waiting allows us room and time to ponder and consider the offense and why we feel so angry. And this is the amazing thing. That action cultivates humility in our life. Because pondering allows us to ask God questions about ourselves, not just the offender. We go beyond demanding justice and self-righteousness, trying to be God, and we consider our own heart and our own habits and our own hang-ups, our own hurt, those deeper issues that may be existing sort of unaware, fear, jealousy, insecurity, abandonment, rejection. It allows us to consider our values. What do we really want out of this or out of life or the relationship or? And all of that pondering and considering before God, all those questions about me, search my heart, God, allows us to grow in humility because it invites us to be ourselves and operate as our true self rather than operating as a wounded, guarded, or confused self, which often is extremely arrogant because it's rooted in pride and being a fake self. See, pride has no interest in pondering. Pride has no interest in asking questions because pride believes it's always right and there are no questions to be asked. But humility grows where pride stops. And so through a posture of learning, through questions and ponderings before God, humility increases. It helps us to come closer to God and His heart for justice in every situation where anger is active. I would say this, that it is quite possible, and I think both Psalm 37 and Psalm 4:4 point this out. As often as we will not wait, be still, and ponder, our anger will probably turn sinful. And those are the warnings in there. Do not sin. Do not sin. Do this. Do not sin. Anger expressed on instinct, church, and you know this experientially, both from anger of others and your being on the receiving end of it and giving it. Instinctive, reactive anger is very different than a calculated response to an injustice. Very different. And so pondering and stillness allow us to make calculated, God-discerned action plans. Instinctive anger is rooted in broken human nature and our own, at times, selfish desires. Anger that is prayed and pondered on with sincerity can't help but cultivate humility and form us into the image of God. All right. Good amount of content for you today. I trust you all have this licked by next Sunday. Here's the sermon in a sentence. It had to be pretty wordy because a lot of words. In prayerful reflection, anger transitions from selfish consumption, condemnation, and control to a righteous warning, an invitation, and redemption, fostering humility and aligning with God's justice and mercy. I read in a book this week an illustration that I thought was just tremendous. It really impacted me. It's a book recommended by Lisa Rayner's parents, actually, and I've been reading. And this pastor tells this story of being up in his bedroom with his wife, and they're brushing their teeth, getting ready to go to bed. And what is taking place in their life at this moment is his wife has recently re-entered the workforce after being at home for a number of years. And she immediately succeeds and excels and rises from like an entry-level position right to a management position very, very quickly. So she's excited about what's happening in her life. And as they're brushing their teeth and getting ready for bed, she's telling her husband, a pastor, about this book on networking that she's reading and how she's really excited to start putting these practices into place. And he dismisses it. Oh, that book's stupid. Why would you want to read that? Blah, blah, and he huffs out of the room. Spends a little bit of time pondering and considering, and he comes back in and he says, I'm really sorry that I just did that to you. I'm really sorry that I just dismissed that and called it stupid. The truth is, you're beautiful and you're really capable and you're really, really likable, and I'm traveling a lot right now, and I'm afraid that somebody else in your networking is going to come in and sweep you off your feet. And it's my own junk, and it's my own insecurity, and it's my own jealousy, and I'm working on it. So keep reading your book. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. And I'm going to keep working on me. I love you. She says to him, you figured that out in 45 seconds? And he says, no, I figured that out over 50 years. Ultimately, this is my hope for all of us, and this is where we'll wrap up. Each of us has lives and families and friends and colleagues and neighbors who will at one time or another be on the receiving end of our anger. And let's be honest, we are also on the receiving end of our anger. Whether mental health, physical health, general moodiness, isolation, losing friends because we're just at times unpleasant. Anger consumes us too. But the truth and the promise is God, the one who is love, the one who is merciful, the one who is patient, but also the one who is at times angry, but perfectly, has made us in his image. And therefore, we will never eliminate anger. It's not about eliminating anger. But if we will be slower to express it, we can actually use this thing as a tool for justice and grace and redemption. But we have to be willing to engage God with it.